The wedding hall shimmered under a canopy of gold and white lights, the kind that made everything seem magical. Except to Elena. For her, the light only magnified the shadows within. Every chandelier sparkled with perfection. Every floral centerpiece screamed luxury, and every guest wore a smile polished for photographs. It was a day meant for love, celebration, and family, yet Elena felt like an intruder in her own bloodline's joy. Her younger sister Isabel was the center of the world tonight, radiant in her designer gown and surrounded by admirers who called her an angel, a dream, a woman who deserved everything. Elena sat quietly at a distant corner table near the kitchen door, watching as the laughter swelled and champagne glasses clinked. Her table for 8 had only one chair occupied, hers. Even the servers seemed to forget her existence, moving past her with the kind of polite blindness reserved for unwanted guests. It hadn't always been this way. Once, Elena and Isabel were inseparable. Two sisters joined by shared secrets, late-night giggles, and dreams whispered into the dark. Isabel was the dramatic one, bold, beautiful, endlessly adored, while Elena was the calm balance, the listener, the fixer. Their father used to say they were two sides of the same coin, but that coin lost its shine the day he died. After his passing, their mother, Margaret, seemed to rewrite the family narrative entirely. Isabel became the golden child, the prodigy of grace and success, while Elena turned into the quiet background character who never quite lived up to her potential. The shift wasn't sudden. It was a slow erosion, a steady theft of affection and belonging. When their father's debts surfaced, it was Elena who worked double shifts, who sold her small art pieces online to pay off the collectors, while Isabel flew off to Europe with her fiancé, posting glossy pictures of Parisian dinners. And yet, Elena had come to this wedding. She had come because, despite everything, she loved her sister, or at least the version of her she used to know. She had chosen forgiveness over pride. When the invitation arrived, written in gold foil with a polite detached, "We would love to have you celebrate with us," Elena told herself that maybe it was an olive branch. But when she arrived and found her name scrawled on a place card at the last table, behind a pillar, away from family, she understood the truth. She wasn't there to be celebrated. She was there to complete the picture, to fill the token role of the older sister, the one who'd smile and stay silent while the world applauded Isabel's happiness. She sat through the ceremony, in the front row only because there was a space left after the bridesmaids had taken theirs. She clapped when Isabel and Liam said their vows. She smiled for the family photos, though her smile wavered when she noticed how the photographer kept shifting his lens to favor the bride's side. In one shot, she was half visible behind Isabel's veil. In another, her face was blurred by light. When she tried to stand beside her mother, Margaret lightly pushed her back, murmuring, "Stay in line, dear. Don't make a scene." That phrase, "don't make a scene," had been her mother's favorite refrain for years. It meant, stay quiet, stay small, stay invisible. At dinner, Elena's chair squeaked as she sat, the sound loud in the quiet of her isolation. The tablecloth was perfectly white, the silverware shining, the scent of roasted salmon thick in the air. Around her, the sound of laughter echoed like a language she no longer understood. From the main table, she could hear Isabel's high, delighted voice telling stories of her wonderful husband and dream life. At one point, Isabel raised her glass for a toast. "To love, to family, and to new beginnings," she said. Then her eyes flicked toward Elena, glimmering with something cruelly playful. "And maybe someday to my dear sister, finally finding someone to make her smile, if she ever decides to step out of her comfort zone." The hall erupted in laughter. Even her mother chuckled, covering her mouth as if it were harmless teasing. Elena's stomach twisted. Her hand tightened around her wine glass. The sound of clinking glasses, the bursts of laughter, the whisper of silk dresses, it all blurred together into a single ringing in her ears. She wanted to leave, to disappear, but something in her refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She lifted her glass slowly, pretending to sip, and forced a small smile that felt like swallowing fire. The servers passed by her table again, filling everyone else's glasses, never noticing hers was empty. The night stretched endlessly. The DJ switched songs, couples filled the dance floor, cameras flashed, and Elena remained in her lonely little corner, an audience to a show that once might have been hers. She stared at her sister gliding across the floor in her ivory gown, her husband twirling her like a princess, her mother watching with tears of joy. It wasn't jealousy that burned inside Elena, it was grief. Grief for the family she once had, for the connection that had turned into performance. Then, in the middle of her silence, a shadow fell across her table. "Is this seat taken?" Elena blinked, startled. She looked up and saw a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, with dark hair slightly tousled as though he'd run his hand through it moments before. His navy suit fit perfectly, his tie slightly loosened, his expression open and kind. He held a glass of champagne in one hand and a small smirk that wasn't arrogant, just quietly amused. "You look like someone who deserves better company than empty chairs," he said. Elena hesitated, unsure if this was a joke or pity. But his tone was genuine, his eyes sincere. She shook her head slightly. "No, it's not taken," she managed to say. Without waiting for another word, he sat down across from her. "Good," he said easily, "because I was starting to think I was the only one here without a crowd." Elena studied him cautiously. "I'm sorry, are you with the bride or the groom?" He smiled. "Friend of the groom." Sort of. He took a sip of his drink, eyes glinting with humor. "Let's just say I was invited last minute, but I'm glad I came." There was something oddly comforting about his voice, a warmth that cut through the noise around them. It wasn't flirtation, it was presence. Real, undemanding presence. Elena felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt all evening. Ease. For the first time that night, someone wasn't looking past her. Someone had seen her. As they talked, she noticed the small things, the way he tilted his head when he listened, the quiet pauses he gave her to respond, the lack of pity in his eyes. When she laughed softly at one of his light-hearted comments, it felt strange and freeing, like air rushing into lungs that had been held too long. The hall's energy shifted. She could feel eyes turning toward her. Isabel from across the room noticed first. Elena saw the confusion flash across her sister's face, then the faint irritation, then curiosity. Her mother followed Isabel's gaze and a frown appeared. It was as though both of them had forgotten Elena could ever attract attention. "By the way," the man said after a moment, leaning slightly closer, "I'm Adrian." "Elena," she replied. "Ah," he said with a small smile. "So you are the famous sister." Elena froze. "Famous?" He chuckled. "Everyone's been talking about the bride's beautiful sister. I can see they weren't exaggerating." Her heart skipped. Compliments weren't foreign to her, but they were rare, and never without an edge of sarcasm when coming from family. From him, it sounded simple, uncalculated. "Thank you," she murmured. Adrian's gaze softened. "You don't belong in this corner, you know. You look like you were meant for the main table." She gave a sad smile. "That's not how it works here." He tilted his head. "Maybe it's time someone changed the rules." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. The absurdity of it all. Her isolation, the humiliation, this stranger sitting beside her as though none of it mattered, made her chuckle. Adrian smiled as if her laughter was the best thing he'd heard all night. From the main table, Isabel's perfect composure cracked just slightly. She whispered something to her husband, and both glanced toward table 14. Elena caught the glance, the irritation masked as concern. But this time she didn't shrink. She looked back calmly, without apology. As the music swelled again, Adrian extended his hand, not demanding but offering. "Would you like to dance?" Her instinct was to refuse. She'd never been the kind to draw attention. But then she thought of Isabel's toast, her mother's cold indifference, the laughter that had echoed like knives. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. They stepped onto the dance floor, the crowd parting instinctively to let them through. The lights reflected off the crystal chandeliers, casting a golden glow on the floor. As Adrian guided her gently through the rhythm, Elena felt something inside her shift. The whispers began immediately. Who was that man? Who was she dancing with? But for once, the murmurs didn't sting. They felt like power. Across the room, Isabel's smile froze. Margaret's wineglass paused midair. For the first time in years, Elena wasn't the invisible sister. She was someone impossible to ignore, and as the song ended, Adrian leaned close enough for only her to hear. "See, I told you," he whispered. "You were meant for more than an empty seat." In that moment, under the soft hum of the next song and the flickering light of 1,000 fairy bulbs, Elena realized that something extraordinary had just begun. Something that would change everything about the story her family had written for her. The music pulsed softly beneath the golden lights of the reception hall, a melody meant to celebrate love and family, though for Elena, it still hummed like a reminder of everything she'd been denied. The moment Adrian took the seat beside her, the rhythm of the evening changed. What had begun as another night of humiliation, one more cruel act in her family's long play of favoritism, was suddenly, inexplicably transformed. He brought a warmth that seemed to push back the cold that had clung to her since she arrived. His presence was confident but gentle, his tone carrying the kind of ease that demanded attention without force. It was strange how quickly he managed to make her forget that she was supposed to be invisible. As the next song began, he asked questions about her, not as polite conversation, but as though he genuinely wanted to know her. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said with a half-smile. "Can't imagine why," she replied dryly, glancing toward Isabel's table, where laughter and champagne flowed as freely as privilege. He followed her gaze. "Family?" he asked. "Unfortunately," Elena murmured, and for the first time all night, someone didn't correct her tone or look away in discomfort. Adrian simply nodded, as though he understood exactly what she meant. They spoke quietly through the clatter of silverware and the swirl of music, trading small pieces of themselves between the noise. Adrian had an easy charm, but not the slick kind she was used to seeing around her sister's crowd. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't make her feel like a charity case for sitting alone. Instead, he listened, really listened, as she talked about her late father, her love for painting, her quiet life. When he asked where she worked and she told him about the small community art center she helped manage, he didn't give the condescending smile she often received. He said, "That sounds like something that actually matters," and for a moment, her throat tightened with the weight of gratitude. Across the hall, Isabel's laughter rang like a bell, sharp and attention-seeking. Her friends crowded around her, taking photos and squealing over her diamond ring. Elena tried not to look, but the scene had a magnetic pull. It was the kind of picture-perfect moment she had grown up believing was the reward for being good, obedient, and selfless. Yet despite years of silence, years of swallowing her own ambitions to hold her fractured family together, she had been pushed aside. Tonight was simply the latest reminder. But with Adrian beside her, the ache dulled. When she smiled at one of his jokes, an actual, unguarded smile, she noticed heads turning. People were beginning to notice her. Isabel noticed, too. During the next upbeat song, Adrian leaned close enough for her to hear over the music. "Would you dance with me?" he asked, holding out his hand. For a second, Elena hesitated. Dancing meant attention. Dancing meant eyes. But then she remembered the toast, the cruel laughter, the years of invisibility. Something in her wanted to reclaim what had been stolen. Her dignity, her presence, her place. So she nodded, slipping her hand into his. The warmth of his palm sent a shiver up her arm. As they stepped onto the dance floor, the crowd parted naturally. The soft glow of the chandeliers bathed them in golden light. Adrian moved with easy confidence, guiding her through the rhythm, his hand at her back steady and sure. At first, she was stiff, unsure how to exist under so many watching eyes. But Adrian spoke softly, just enough for her to hear. "Forget them," he murmured. "Just listen to the music." So she did. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself breathe. For the first time that night, she wasn't the forgotten sister or the family embarrassment. She was simply Elena, a woman who could move, laugh, live. The song shifted into something slower, and before she could protest, Adrian pulled her gently closer. The world blurred at the edges. From the corner of her eye, she saw Isabel's forced smile falter, her husband whispering something to her that only deepened the frown. It was a small victory, but it lit a spark inside Elena that she hadn't felt in years. When the song ended, applause rippled across the floor, polite, curious, speculative. Adrian led her back to her table, but before they sat, he leaned slightly toward her. "You're not exactly treated like family here, are you?" he said quietly. The question caught her off guard. She looked up at him, unsure how to respond. "It's complicated," she managed to say, her voice tight. He nodded slowly. "Family usually is, especially when they decide who's worthy of love and who's not." His words struck something deep. He wasn't guessing. He knew. When they sat again, the conversation shifted. Adrian grew quieter, his tone more deliberate. "I didn't come here for Isabel or Liam," he said suddenly. "I came for you?" Elena froze. "Me? You don't even know me." But Adrian's eyes were steady, unwavering. "You're wrong. I've heard your name before. From Liam himself." Her pulse quickened. "You know Liam?" "Unfortunately," Adrian replied, his voice edged with something dark. "We worked together a few months ago on a property deal. One night, during a dinner with some clients, he started talking about his fiancé's family. About you." Elena's heart sank. "What did he say?" Adrian hesitated before answering. "He called you pitiful, said you were still clinging to your father's memory, said you'd never amounted to much, that you were always jealous of Isabel. He laughed about how your part of the inheritance paid for some of their wedding costs." He paused, watching her reaction. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The way he talked, it wasn't just cruel. It was personal. Elena felt her throat tighten, her chest burning. Of course Liam would mock her. He had always been smug, always treated her kindness as weakness. But hearing that her father's money she had worked to protect after his death, had been used to fund the very celebration that now humiliated her, made her stomach twist with nausea. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because I couldn't let it go," Adrian said. "When I saw your name on the guest list, I had to see for myself. I wanted to know if what he said was true. But after 5 minutes sitting here, I knew he was lying." Elena blinked. "Lying?" Adrian's voice softened. "You're nothing like he described. You're quiet but strong, reserved but real. The kind of person people overlook because they're too busy chasing noise." She stared at him, unsure what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her mother, not Isabel, not anyone. Her family had always defined her by what she wasn't. But in Adrian's words, she felt something shift. For the first time, someone saw her not as a background character, but as a person of worth. The sound of heels clicking against marble broke the moment. Isabel approached their table, her perfect smile brittle at the edges. "Well," she said sweetly, her eyes flicking between them, "aren't you too cozy?" Her voice was soft, but her tone carried an undercurrent of venom. "Elena, dear, I didn't realize you'd finally found someone." Elena opened her mouth, but Adrian stood before she could answer. His expression was polite, but his posture was firm. "Yes," he said smoothly, "I'm her date." "Didn't she tell you?" Isabel's smile faltered, confusion clouding her features. "Her date?" "That's right," Adrian continued, his arm slipping casually around Elena's shoulders. "She thought it'd be rude to bring someone too impressive, but I insisted." The hall seemed to hold its breath. Isabel's friends glanced at one another, murmuring. Cameras flashed. Even her mother, seated nearby, looked stunned. Elena felt her face heat, but it wasn't embarrassment. It was power. For once, she wasn't the one being pitied. She was the woman everyone wanted to know more about. "Interesting," Isabel said, her tone sharp beneath the honey. "I didn't realize my sister was seeing anyone." Adrian smiled. "Some things are better kept private until the right moment." He glanced at Elena, his eyes glimmering with quiet reassurance. "Wouldn't you agree?" Elena could barely speak, but she managed a small nod. Isabel's composure cracked. Her perfect lips tightened, and she muttered something about needing to speak with the event coordinator before turning away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. As she disappeared into the crowd, Adrian leaned toward Elena again. "Let them see who you really are," he whispered. "Don't shrink for anyone," Elena exhaled slowly. The noise of the hall returned, the chatter, the laughter, but now it sounded distant, irrelevant. She looked at Adrian, and a small, genuine smile tugged at her lips. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He shrugged lightly. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." For the first time that night, she didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't care about Isabel's whispers, her mother's disapproval, or Liam's smug grin from across the room. As she and Adrian walked out later, the night air cool against her skin, she realized something she hadn't felt in years. She felt seen. And as they stepped into the quiet darkness beyond the glowing hall, Elna knew that this night, this stranger, had cracked something open inside her, a door she had forgotten even existed. What had begun as a night of humiliation had turned into the beginning of something powerful, something that would soon unravel every secret her family had buried beneath their glittering smiles. The weeks that followed felt like a long corridor with doors silently unlocking one by one, each opening onto a memory Elena had tried to bury, each lit by a new, braver kind of light. And at the end of that corridor, she could already sense a threshold she had never crossed before, the place where she would no longer apologize for existing. The coffee with Adrian had left her with trembling hands and a steady mind, an odd pairing that, for once, worked in her favor. She cried in the cab home as she reread the copies he'd given her. Account numbers, transfer authorizations, dates that matched the month she'd skipped meals to make payments, signatures that looked eerily like her mother's careful script. Then she set the pages on her kitchen table and sat very still until the emotions drained enough for reason to speak. She spent that first night drafting a letter, not to a lawyer yet, but to herself. A list titled "What I Will No Longer Accept," and beneath it she wrote simple sentences that felt like chisels tapping stone. "I will not sit at the last table. I will not make myself smaller to soothe someone else's pride. I will not be stolen from, not emotionally, not financially, not again." At dawn, she brewed new coffee, opened her laptop, and began the meticulous work of assembling the truth. She scanned the documents Adrian had given her, pulled her bank statements, cross-checked dates against emails from the executor, dug up texts from her mother telling her to be patient. Your father would want harmony. And she stitched the evidence together with a clarity that surprised her. By noon, she called a legal aid clinic. By evening, she had a consultation set for the following week. When she told Adrian, his response was unadorned and perfect. "Good, I'm here." He didn't ask to be a hero. He didn't crowd her with solutions. He drove her to the notary's office, brought her food when she forgot to eat, and stood back while she found her own spine's full height. Elena's first public step was small and seismic at once. A single post on her rarely used social media, no names, no insults, only redacted documents, dates, and a caption that read, "Sometimes the seat they push you away from becomes the stage, where truth finally sits." She attached a photo of an empty chair at a white linen table, the seat from the wedding cropped, so only the corner of a centerpiece, and the blurred trail of a server's sleeve were visible. She expected scorn or silence. Instead, within hours, her post was shared by people she hadn't seen since school, by an old art student from the center who wrote, "Miss Elena taught me that kindness isn't weakness," by a local journalist who messaged to ask if she would talk. The story took on its own momentum, not a wildfire of gossip, but a kind of slow, honest dawn, the light moving from one window to the next across town. Some commenters tried to dismiss her, to call her bitter or attention-seeking, but each time they did, another person replied with a measured sentence, a defense of the facts, a reminder that family is not a shield for theft. When the journalist called for the second time, Elena agreed to speak, not to drag anyone's name through the mud, but to put the facts where they could breathe. The piece went live 2 days later. A careful article about inheritance misuse, about a woman who had paid off her father's debt only to find the money meant for her redirected to fund a luxury event. The reporter didn't name Isabel or Liam, though the timeline and photographs from the viral wedding made the connection obvious. Elena had asked for anonymity for one reason. She wanted truth to do the work, not revenge dressed as spectacle. But spectacle came anyway, invited by the indiscretion of those who had the most to lose. Isabel, rattled by the murmurs at her Pilates studio and the way conversations dimmed when she entered a room, posted a story on her own account, a glossy photo of her hand on Liam's arm and a caption that read, "Haters will invent drama to ruin happiness. We are blessed and unbothered." That, more than any document, pulled the curtain open. People compared her caption's timing to the article, dug up old photos, and in doing so found a seam that had been carelessly stitched, an image of a paid in full, receipt for the ballroom dated the same week. Elena's expected transfer had inexplicably delayed. Someone with a private profile posted a screen recording of Liam bragging at a bachelor party about reallocating funds, his voice thick with alcohol. Elena didn't share it. She didn't need to. The city, small as it was, carried the clip from dinner table to brunch counter, and the tone of conversations shifted from shrill curiosity to something quieter, a collective recognition that they'd watched a woman be humiliated and had clapped along with the band. A few people messaged Elena to apologize, maybe not for their laughter that night, but for their silence around its edges. She accepted each apology like a white stone placed on a windowsill, not to decorate the past, but to mark a different path forward. The legal side unfolded with the patience of a clock. Her lawyer, a woman named Priya with a voice that never rose and eyes that missed nothing, read the documents and said, "We have a case, but before the court we have a choice. Do you want a public fight or do you want your life back?" Elena thought of the empty seat, the toast, the years of being told not to make a scene. Then she thought of something else, the way the girls at the art center watched her when she taught them to mix a color until it matched the feeling in their chests. "I want both," she said finally. "I want what was taken, and I want this to stop happening in our house." Priya nodded. "Then we'll begin with a demand letter." The letter was clinical and lethal, addressed to the executor, to Isabel and Liam, to Margaret by name. It detailed the sums, the dates, the relevant clauses in the will, and concluded with an ultimatum: return the funds with interest or face legal action for conversion and fraud. Elena expected a phone call from her mother, a barrage of messages. Instead, she received silence like a slammed door. When the reply finally came, it wasn't from Margaret but from a lawyer Liam had hired. A man who wrote in polished contempt that Elena had misunderstood the spirit of familial generosity. Priya's response was 4 sentences long and ended with a draft complaint for immediate filing. The next morning, Margaret called. Her voice, always the instrument of appearances, wavered with a note Elena had never heard in it before. Fear, or perhaps the first thin crack of shame. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because you already did," Elena answered, and the line went quiet except for breath. Confrontation is rarely cinematic in real time. It's a series of ordinary moments that accumulate until the ordinary breaks. Elena chose a day in a public place, her father's favorite park, under the gnarled plane trees where he had sat with a newspaper and called the ducks by invented names. And she asked them to meet her there. Margaret in a camel coat with pearls at her throat as if the right accessories could restore the narrative. Isabel with sunglasses too large for the cloudy morning. Liam with his jaw set too tight. Adrian stood at a distance, hands in his pockets, near enough to be a harbor if she needed one, far enough that this would still be her tide to navigate. Elena held a folder but didn't open it. "You took something that wasn't yours," she said, and her voice didn't tremble. Isabel opened her mouth first, because Isabel always had, shaping air into excuses as if sound itself could decorate a wound. "It was for the family," she said, a line she'd probably practiced in the mirror. The wedding was not the family, Elena said quietly. Yours? Liam scoffed, a sound too small to be dangerous but designed to be cutting. You didn't even want the money, he said. You live like a nun. I live like a person, Elena replied, and for a second he had no answer to that. Margaret touched her pearls as if they were rosary beads. Your father would hate this, she said. He would hate what you did, Elena said back, and that was when Margaret's face changed, not with rage, but with the exhaustion of a story that could no longer hold itself upright. We thought you'd understand, she said, so soft it was almost an apology. Elena shook her head. I finally do. She didn't raise her voice, didn't list the nights she'd walked home in the rain after a closing shift, the mornings she'd skipped lunch to make a payment. She simply handed them an envelope with the formal notice of filing and said, You have 7 days. 7 days is a lifetime when a house of cards is already swaying. On day 2, the club where Liam entertained clients uninvited him until matters are resolved. On day 4, a vendor posted about unpaid balances, then scrubbed the post, then posted again with screenshots. On day 5, Margaret's bridge group paused meetings and offered her a silence so complete it became another mirror. On day 6, Isabel arrived at Elena's apartment building with sunglasses off and mascara bruised under her eyes. Elena met her on the sidewalk. She didn't invite her in. I didn't know, Isabel said at once, a lie that had once been easy, a habit with muscle memory. You signed the florist check, Elena replied. Don't make me bring the ledger to the curb. Isabel swallowed. And for a moment the fierce younger sister emerged, the child who had cried into Elena's pillow after nightmares, the girl who used to draw hearts on Elena's homework margins. I was scared, she said, the admission surprising even herself. Mom said you didn't need it, that you wouldn't use it. That I wouldn't make a scene, Elena said. Isabel let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it weren't so broken. Yes? Traffic hissed around them, and Elena thought of how many lives were being lived at that very second without the smallest idea of this one conversation, and the thought steadied her. You have one chance to make this right before court, she said. And you won't be making it right with me. You'll be making it right with the truth. Isabel nodded once, a small, jerky motion of someone learning how to agree with reality. On the 7th day, an email arrived from Priya with 3 attachments, a transfer receipt from Isabel's joint account with Liam returning the principal and interest to the estate account specified in the will, a letter from their mother acknowledging a breach of fiduciary duty of care, with a promise to undergo independent financial counseling before acting on the estate again, and a formal apology addressed to Elena, not florid, not worming for sympathy, just 21 lines that said, I did this, and I'm sorry, and I know sorry is not enough. After reading, Elena closed her laptop and stared at the light slanting across her small kitchen tiling, feeling not vindication exactly, and not relief, but the clean, quiet sensation of a knot being untied in a room you didn't realize was tight with ropes. She called Priya to confirm the next steps, then called the art center to say she'd be in time for the afternoon class, then stood very still and allowed herself a single, deep sob, not because she was in pain, but because she wasn't anymore. When Adrian came by that evening with takeout and a small plant with ridiculous tiny leaves, she held the pot in both hands and started laughing at how earnestly living it was. Now you have something in your house that refuses to die, he said. Besides me, she teased, and he grinned in a way that put light in the space between her ribs. The town's noise didn't end with the transfer. If anything, it changed pitch. Some people demanded blood, wanted Elena to finish them, to post the apology, to publish details and dates until there was nothing left of the couple who had danced beneath chandeliers. But Elena's revenge had never been about their ruin. It had been about the restoration of her dignity and the repair of a story she would hand to her future self without shame. She posted once more, a photograph of the park bench under the plane trees, the seat empty and waiting, captioned, Repaid. Lessons learned? I'm going back to my life. The journalist reached out again, hungry for a follow-up, but Elena declined. "Print this instead," she wrote. "Teach your readers how to protect themselves when grief makes them soft." The paper ran a practical guide beside a short note about the anonymous subject who declined to be a spectacle, and Elena clipped the page and pinned it to the corkboard at the art center, where the kids tacked up their drawings of sunflowers and lopsided dogs. Her relationship with Margaret did not heal overnight. Some fabrics, once torn, never return to their original weave, but they can be mended into something else. Plainer, perhaps, but sturdy. Months later, Margaret came to the art center's small winter showcase, standing at the back while Elena introduced the students and their work. After the applause, she approached, her hands empty, her pearls replaced by a simple scarf. "You were always better at seeing," she said, eyes watery in a way that made Elena think of rain finally finding the right gutter. "I'm trying to be better at seeing, too." They stood together for a moment in the cheerful chaos of children demanding juice and parents folding chairs. "I can't promise anything," Elena said. "Me either," Margaret replied. And for once that was enough. The acknowledgement that change is not a vow but a practice. Isabel and Liam, well, their arc bent toward consequence. Without the easy capital of charm and siphoned funds, Liam struggled. Deals evaporated, and with each loss, the version of himself he'd curated peeled away until what remained was a man who had to look work in the eye and learn its language. Isabel, released from the performance of being the miracle bride, began visiting a counselor. In a small act of reparation, she volunteered at the art center once a week, rolling paint onto palettes and learning the names of kids who didn't know or care who she'd been in filtered photographs. She and Elena were not close, not like the sleeping bag summers of childhood, but they were no longer enemies in pretty dresses. Sometimes after class, they walked to the corner bakery and split a cinnamon roll while avoiding old reflexes. Isabel's desire to be adored, Elena's instinct to disappear, and in their cautious laughter, something like sisterhood, weathered and honest, raised its shy head. As for Adrian, the word stranger fell away from him the way a chrysalis falls when a creature remembers its wings. He didn't rescue Elena at the park or the courthouse or the comment sections. He didn't have to. He simply kept showing up, at the center to hang a crooked shelf, at her apartment with a box of cheap popsicles on an unseasonably hot day, at his own desk, where he set boundaries around the kind of men he'd shaken hands with before. Sometimes they walked by the river and didn't speak for long stretches, not because there was nothing to say, but because quiet had finally become a room they both liked living in. When spring unfurled its small green flags on the trees, he asked her if she wanted to attend a friend's wedding with him, and she said yes, and then, smiling into his shoulder, added, "But only if we get to sit wherever we want." They arrived at the venue, smaller, sunnier, all wildflowers and mismatched chairs, and when the usher asked where they'd like to sit, Elena glanced at the front row and then at the middle and then at the back, where a pair of old women were whispering happily. "There," she said, choosing a spot with a good view of the vows and an easy path to the dance floor. During the reception, when a slow song swelled, Adrian held out his hand and she took it without thinking, her body remembering that night when everything had shifted, and as they moved under strings of warm bulbs, people watched not because they were hungry for drama, but because joy, when it is unperformed, has a gravity that pulls eyes gently to it. A few guests whispered about how lovely they looked, but the whispers felt like a blessing, not surveillance. Elena laughed, loose and bright, and when the song ended, they didn't hurry off the floor. They stood for a moment with foreheads touching, and she thought of her father, of the plane trees, of the empty chair at table 14, how even that humiliation had become a hinge in the door she now walked through every morning. In the months that followed, Elena painted again, not to sell, not to prove, but to move color where words could not yet go. One canvas was nothing but chairs, wooden, metal, velvet, a bench with chipped paint, a stool with one leg shorter than the others. In the middle, she painted an empty chair with a gold thread running from its back into the air, and at the end of the thread, a small knot tied like a promise. She hung it in her living room. And when people asked what it meant, she said, "It means I don't have to sit where I'm told." In another painting, she captured the river at dusk, the color not quite blue and not quite gray, and Adrian stood behind her while she mixed the exact tint. And when she got it right, they both knew without words. Revenge, she realized, had been the wrong word all along for what she'd done. What she'd done was reclamation. She had returned to herself the things that were hers: her name, her share, her seat, her say. And in returning them, she had made room for a life that didn't hinge on anyone's applause, where love was not a performance, and justice was not a scream, but a steady hand placing the truth exactly where it belonged. And so, on an ordinary evening lit by the lamplight that always made her apartment look like amber, Elena curled up on the couch with Adrian, his plant thriving ridiculously in the corner, the city humming a low, companionable song outside, and she knew with a calm that was not fragile that she would never again sit alone because someone else ordered her to. If she ever chose a quiet corner, it would be because she wanted the view from there, and because the person beside her, this man, this friend, this love, would sit for the same reason. Not from exile, but from choice.